said yes, and I prayed with her. When she got through prayer, tears was running out of her eyes. She's wiping the tears there. I can't look into her heart. She would not be the first person that I've done that with who never followed through. But the thing is, it wasn't me that put the wheel in my heart to go over and talk to her. It was me who, by the grace and the strength of God, became a yielded tool for God to work with.
There we go.
It certainly was not me that convicted her heart. It was not me that brought the tears to her eyes. And I would not have done it had God not put it in my will to do so. Gave me that desire, and then gave me the strength and the determination to do so. And when I yielded, then God worked in through me so that that which God gave me to do, God did. Say amen to that?
Amen. Amen.
Yeah, I got it.
What an encouragement that is, or what an encouragement that should be to each of us. God never gives us an assignment that God doesn't do the work. If we will give him the body to work through. If we will submit to him, and here we have that sovereignty of God and the responsibility of man. God in his sovereign power put the wheel in my heart to go over. Put it in her heart to listen attentively to what I had to say. And then did the work that I would love to be able to say, boy, I went and won Randy to the Lord, you know. But I didn't go win Randy to the Lord. I merely yielded to God's working, and God then used us as a tool to present the gospel to Cindy, and then gave it Cindy the ability to hear, to receive, to accept, and the willingness to pray. And so we have the sovereignty of God. God in his sovereign puts it in our will, and then when we yield to it, God does it. We have the responsibility to be that instrument, that tool for God. God needed a body, a tool, a voice, if you will, that he could speak through to give the gospel to Randy, convict her heart, and then forgive her of her sins, and so forth. So here in verse 13, it says, for it is God which worketh in you both to will and to do of his good pleasure. When we yield to him, then God will use us to do God's good pleasure. Amen?
Amen.
Now then, since it is God who wills it, and it is God who does it, then we need to be instruments that God can use. And so he's going to say here in verse 14, do all things without murmuring and disputing. It appears from verse 27 of chapter 1, where Paul says, when I'm absent or present, may I hear of your affairs, that you're in one, that you're standing fast in one spirit, in one accord, in working together or striving together. From what he says there in verse 2, and then if you go over to chapter 4, verse 1, there's two ladies in the church there that's having a problem. And so Paul, being aware of what's happening there in the church of Philippi. How does he know what's happening there? Well, very possibly because Epaphroditus, who is possibly the pastor of the church, has taken a gift from the church down to Rome to give to Paul to meet Paul's needs, and has without doubt shared him the situation in the church there. And so it seems that very possibly there was some contention, some strife, etc. In the church there. And so he's going to say, first of all, do all things. Whatever it is that God wills for you to do, whatever it is that God is wanting to do in you, you do it without murmuring or disputing. Nothing will rob a church of the Spirit of God. Nothing will hinder the work. Nothing will rob the church of joy like a segment or even a person in the church who is murmuring and who is disputing over what's happened. Verse 15, he says that you may be blameless and harmless. Okay, yeah, here we have the second reason. The first reason, remember, back up there was that we are the sons of God. Or maybe here, let me get down here. That you may be blameless and harmless. Okay, here, 15, 16, and 17, he's going to give us three reasons why we need to have the mind of Christ. Why we need to be steadfast in one spirit, one mind, one accord, working together. Why we need not to dispute and murmur among ourselves. He said that you may be blameless and harmless, the sons of God without rebuke in the midst of a crooked and perverse nation among whom you shine forth as lights. So number one, and he's going to give us three reasons here why we need to take on this mind of Christ and live what we've said thus far. Number one is we as the church, we make up the household of God. We are the sons of God. As sons of God, we either bring glory to God or we bring a reproach upon God. And we as the church have been set down here in the midst of a crooked and a perverse world who is looking for things to criticize the church for. And so we must live our lives before them in such a way that they can find nothing to blame us with, or nothing that they can find nothing that they can use to harm our reputation or our testimony. We are, as sons of God, we are to conduct ourselves in such a way that here in the midst of this crooked and perverse world, we will not bring reproach upon the name of Christ. Secondly, he said that you may be blameless and harmless, the sons of God without rebuke, in the midst of a crooked and perverse nation among whom you shine as lights in the world. Jesus said over in Matthew chapter 5, in his Sermon on the Mount, there, verses 14 through 16, that we are both the light of the world and we are the salt of the earth. When the Bible speaks of light and darkness, light characterizes or reflects upon righteousness. Darkness characterizes sin or wickedness. And so the world is in darkness. They're unable to see their need for Christ, unable to see how to be saved in their own carnal, fleshly way. God has called us to be lights. One commentator said we're to be like a star shining in the night there, in the darkness of the night there. We are to take the gospel and we are to bring it to them. The light of the gospel, he says there that we might hold. Notice he says here, holding forth in verse 16, holding forth the word of life. The word of life is the good news of the gospel. We are to shine a light and we are to hold it up before them so that the lost can come to know Christ and receive Christ. There's a third reason, real quickly here. We've got about 5 minutes. He said, holding forth the word of life, that I may rejoice in the day of Christ, that I have not run in vain, neither labored in vain. Paul is going to use this term in vain 4 different times. Over in 1 Corinthians chapter 15, verse 13, he says, I declare to you the gospel which I also preached unto you, which you received, wherein you stand, by which also you are saved, if you keep in memory that which I preached unto you, lest you should believe in vain. In Galatians chapter 4, he, in verse 11, I believe it is, he makes a statement here. Let me just flip over there and read it to you real quickly, instead of messing it up and trying to quote it to you. He said, I am afraid of you, lest I have bestowed upon you labor in vain. What's Paul talking about? Well, if you turn to the first chapter of the book of Galatians, Paul is going to say there, I marvel that you're so soon removed from my gospel to another gospel, which is not a gospel. He goes on to say, I would that they would be a curse who has deceived you. He goes on to say, if I or an angel from heaven should bring to you any other gospel. I said to David Jeremiah, I believe it was this week, and David Jeremiah said it's interesting. 2 of the great religions of the world, the Muslim religion and the Mormon religion, both were started because Muhammad supposedly saw an angel who gave to him the doctrine of the Muslims. Joseph Smith saw the angel, supposedly, was his name there?
Angel.
Moroni, and who, of course, gave him the golden tablets with the Book of Mormon written on it and so forth. What had happened here in both of these, an angel has came and brought them a false doctrine. And so, because the Galatians were being drawn away by these false teachers, Paul says there, I'm afraid of you, lest I have labored. I bestowed those labors, that traveling, that preaching, that persecution, that I went through to bring to you the gospel, is all in vain. He says here in Philippians that here in verse 16, holding forth the word of life, that I may rejoice in the day of Christ, that I have not run in vain, neither labored in vain. If we turn over to 1 Thessalonians in chapter 3, I believe it is, in verse 5, I believe it is, or maybe it's 1:3, I mean, just words that there. But again, he is going to point out the fact that it is verse 3:5, chapter 3. For this cause, when I could no longer forbear, I sent to know your faith, lest by some means the tempter have tempted you, and our labor be in vain. Paul was concerned about the fact that he had taken the gospel to these 4 different churches, and in each case concerned that their lack of spiritual growth would result in the fact that when he stands before Christ, that his labor will have been in vain. I think Paul would have loved my favorite song, that song, thank you. You know, that third verse is one by one they came as far as the eye could see. Each one's life was somehow touched by your generosity. The little things you've done, the sacrifices made, a vision once on earth, in heaven now proclaimed. I know up in heaven you're not supposed to cry. But I'm almost sure there were tears in your eyes when Jesus took your hand and you stood before the Lord. And he said, child, look around you, for great is your reward. I'm confident in heaven. The people of the church of Corinth, of Galatia, of Philippians, of 1 Thessalonians, who stayed faithful, are thanking the Apostle Paul for his faithfulness and standing before them. I think every one of us ought to be concerned, determined to do whatever we can do to help those that we win to the Lord to stay faithful. And one of the reasons why we go back and go back and go back, visiting people that we've shared Christ with, is because we are afraid that when we stand before Christ, not to our hurt in the sense of the word, but to theirs, we're going to stand there. Our labor will have been in vain. He goes on to say in verse 18, and we'll close, for the same cause also do you joy and rejoice with me. And in verse 17 he says here, yea, and if I be offered upon the sacrifices and service of your faith, I joy and rejoice with you all. Paul has already shared, if you turn back to chapter 1 just real quickly, and we will close here. In verses 21 down through 23, he says, for to me to live is Christ, and to die is gain. But if I live in the flesh, this is the fruit of my labor. Yet what I shall choose I wot not. For I am in a strait betwixt two, having a desire to depart and to be with Christ, which is far better. Nevertheless, to abide in the flesh is more needful for you. In other words, Paul has already told these Christians here, listen, to die is an opportunity. To die is gain. I'm not concerned about dying. If this imprisonment that I'm enduring results in my execution, then I still rejoice. If my sacrifice of service that I render to you is going to cost me my life, then I joy. I rejoice in it. And then he says here, and ye also likewise, for the same cause, do you joy and rejoice with me. And so when we look at the whole of the message tonight, taking on that name of Christ, living a life that glorifies him, allowing God to do his will and his work in us, as we take forth the gospel, as we hold forth the light, we can have the assurance that God is working in us. And when we stand before Christ, all those that we win to him, who stay faithful, will be there to our glory, to our praise. Father, we come to you tonight. We thank you for your word. And God, we just pray that, Lord, you'll help each one of us. God, that we might have the mind of Christ. I'm reminded in 2 Peter 2:21, you said there, even for this cause, that like as Christ suffered for us, leaving us an example, that we should walk in his steps. Father, I pray, Lord, help us, God, to have your mind, to walk in your steps. Father, to do all things, Lord, without murmuring or disputing, but God demonstrating humility of heart.